Welcome to the Prescott Today show. My name is Harry Oberg, Mayor of Prescott. I have two guests with me today, Mr. Tom Geis, who's the director of our Prescott Community Development Department, and I have Mr. Ken Maverick, who is a developer in town and one of our customers that utilizes the services of the city, and in particular Mr. Geis. We thought we'd have a roundtable discussion today to just talk about what community development means in Prescott. Some of the things that we do in community development from the permitting side. We also have boards and commissions that are basically quasi-governmental groups that advise us and make decisions for us that can come before the council. And we'll also talk about some of the grant programs that we have. So first of all, I think I'd like to start with you, Tom, and talk about what is community development? What does it mean to the people in Prescott?
Well, first, Mayor, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me here today to be able to talk about the department and the services that we provide to the city of Prescott and the citizens of Prescott. But the Community Development Department is involved in private development permitting. It has planning and zoning, building permitting and inspections, historic preservation, as well as staffing the boards and commissions, the mayor and council appointed boards and commissions, as well as the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is, we staff the Citizen Advisory Committee for that board. So we're involved in day-to-day business and permitting projects for construction and the inspection of those projects through the construction process. And on the planning side, we're involved in the preparation of the Prescott General Plan. And ultimately, that's a plan that's adopted by the council and goes to the voters for ratification, and that's done every 10 years.
And did you call that the general plan?
That's the general plan, and it's actually a result of some legislation by the Arizona legislature back in 1998 and 2000, and then amended again in 2002. It's called the Growing Smarter statute, and there's certain requirements of communities for different chapters or elements within the community's general plan. It's known as a comprehensive plan, otherwise known as a general plan in the state of Arizona. So it's a basis for the community to see land developed by certain zoning classifications. So anytime there's a rezoning application or development, it must be consistent with the community's general plan. It's a fairly significant document.
Right. And I think the general plan, I know we have a number of boards and commissions, Planning and Zoning, Prescott Preservation Commission, Board of Adjustments, Unified Development Code Committee, Advisory and Appeals Board. I think, Ken, you've been on a couple of those boards, haven't you?
I have, Mayor, and again, also thank you for inviting me here today. I feel honored to be a part of it. I've been connected to the city of Prescott for over 30 years, and I just think it's a wonderful community, and decided a number of years ago to step up and volunteer and do some things. Both of these, I've been on the Board of Adjustment. I was on there for several years, and now I've been honored to be on the Planning and Zoning Commission, which I'm just flattered to be on. I think it's a very worthwhile contribution to the city. We make slightly less than the mayor and council does on salaries, which is just fine. As a result, we end up with some good people that want to participate in it. But yes, to answer your question, I've been on two commissions, and it's a wonderful community aspect.
And I think you work on the general plan from those commissions, don't you?
As a result of the Planning and Zoning Commission, we get to review the general plan. The general plan this time, I think it's the general plan 2015, was probably 3 years in the making, with a very specialized group, 10 or 12 people that sat for weekly, whatever their schedule was, to come up with this general plan. And it is a general plan. It's a plan to give the city a general sense of how it wants to move ahead. There's
kind of like a vision.
Kind of a vision. There's several sections in there that deal with transportation and hospitality and entertainment and economics and whatnot. It's really a pretty comprehensive group, and they had a very, I felt, a good group of people that worked on it. Unfortunately, because of the longevity, they lost a couple people in the process, but that's to be understood. But yeah, we get to look at it after they've gone through for the most part, and we may be able to perhaps make some recommendations, certainly in the areas that really affect planning and zoning. Buildings, the zoning aspect of it, how we place the zoning, where the zoning goes, and where where you think the city's moving in that direction.
And when you talk zoning, you're talking about single-family, multifamily, commercial. I think there's some other categories too.
All the way through. There's, gosh, I don't know the number of zoning categories, but it goes all the way through a single family to multifamily, high, low, heavy density, industrial, commercial, the same type of thing. You have different levels of each category, and including industrial, with especially with the aspect of the air park. There's a lot of industrial activity out that way.
So when permits come in, you have to look at the general plan and ensure that the permits meet the zoning requirements for whatever.
Yeah, really
facilities
on
we
two
do.
different levels. Where at the construction level, the zoning's pretty much been established as when a project comes in for a building permit. But if somebody is proposing a larger scale project, and I think we could use the Lakeview example project at the corner of Willow Lake and Willow Creek Road, that when it was initially planned years ago, didn't have the underlying zoning for that particular use. So through a series of rezonings over a number of years, that zoning was put into place. And then the time came for the property to be platted, so it came in through the subdivision, preliminary and final platting process. And then now we're at the point where individual building permits are being pulled for individual tenants within that. So it's kind of a tiered process depending on whether the property is appropriately zoned. And the general plan is really kind of it's the physical land development plan for the community, and there's a map that's included within the plan, and viewers have an interest in seeing the plan. It can be seen online on the city's webpage, which is www.prescott-az.gov, and the plan map shows appropriate locations of certain types of land uses category versus zoning districts, and there are a number of districts within each category. And using industrial as an example, much of the airport area is zoned industrial, and there's 2 or 3 different categories of industrial zoning: light industrial, general industrial.
I think I noticed here some information you gave me some time back that I think we had 63 single-family permits in 2011, and 2015 you're up to 233, so almost a 400% increase.
That's correct. Yeah, and just this past year we issued 316 single-family permits, so it's up again. Yeah, growth has been very steady for the last 4 or 5 years.
So, when you have this ramping up in activity, I have developers come to me and say, it's taking longer on my plans. Sometimes they feel that, the time is excessive. I know that we try and keep our workforce steady, but at some point, when you get this kind of activity level, you're going to have to probably come up with some ways to improve the system, and I think you've been trying to do that lately, and I'm certain Ken can probably tell us whether or not he feels the process is efficient and getting him the information he needs timely so he can do what he has to do.
And I'm going to be really careful here. I do have some thoughts on that, as everybody does. When you're trying to plan a project, whether it's building your own home or building a industrial building or a shopping center, you have your goals in mind. And working with the city, just by its nature, is in your way. So what you want is something to go smoothly with the city. The city's in charge and is mandated to make sure that certain processes are met. Certainly the sewer, the water, the streets, the access, the building codes, the construction issues. Those things have to be looked at by someone other than yourself. Even though you hire, on any category, you will typically hire an architect and an engineer to interface with the city, because their language on many issues is just different than you and I are used to. I know we were chatting the other day, you mentioned something about construction of a home, and it was helpful to have somebody explain what the reason for that was. But generally, you got a couple of components with the city. One, you really start with zoning. If your property is not zoned exactly for what you're looking for, you can go to the zoning department and talk to them about perhaps a zoning change. You might have multifamily light, and you might want multifamily medium or some other zoning.
And those have to come before the council, right?
They do for a rezoning, and that in turn has to be consistent with the community's general plan.
Okay.
And even within the zoning, if you're not even requesting a change in zoning, Each zoning district has its own requirements as far as setbacks and height and density and parking and that type of thing. So that department is really an important first step for someone who's looking to invest or develop in the community. And in our case here, and for the past several years, Tom Geis has been in charge of the community planning, which covers the planning and zoning and the building code. I know years ago it used to, I think, include public works.
No, we had
Engineering.
over the years. It's had economic development, the
Yeah.
airport at one time. For a while there, we even had animal control, which was a pretty interesting aspect of municipal services.
And I think it's the front door for when people come into the city to look to do something. They're looking to build a home. They're looking to put a lot of money into the community in some fashion. And having a department, as this department works, is fairly friendly. They tend to have this department has a can-do attitude, or how can we help? Here's how we see the issue. Here's how we might be able to resolve some of the shortfalls of it. Because you do have a lot of things that you could trip yourself over. And Tom's department has always been pretty friendly from that respect. So it's a great place to start a project. You get a sense of what you need to do and if you need to change anything about your plan or even the zoning.
So what have you done to try and improve the process, with this greater workload that you've had come in?
We continually look at ways to improve the services that we provide to not only the development community, but the citizens of Prescott. Anybody that might have a question about how to use their property, if they want to put a fence up or they're looking at adding a garage, we don't require appointments, first of all. If anybody needs information, they can come right in off the street and we make ourselves available. So we're accessible, and we focus on being accessible to anybody that needs information. But some of the more recent changes that we've done, actually starting about a year ago, we brought three staff over from Public Works Engineering, and created a one-stop permit center. And now much of the plan review and questions from the public related to utilities, drainage, those types of public works and engineering related aspects of development can be answered all at the same location in City Hall. So we think that's helped. It's helped us streamline the process and provide a more responsive service. But it's also helped us from a standpoint of having better coordination among staff. We're all in the same location and in processing and turning plans around. And generally our stated goal for plan review is 3 weeks. And that's actually pretty good when you look at the number of departments. The fire department ultimately looks at it, utilities looks at it, public works, engineering, planning and zoning, and then building. So there's 5 or 6 different departments, and for the last year plus, water resource management staff have been very involved in looking at it.
So I know that the fire inspector comes into the building and he looks at his portion of the plans. I think sometimes the plans actually have to go over to Public Works,
They do.
where they worked over there, and
They
I think
do.
you've indicated in the past that maybe to make things go a little faster, if you had maybe another set of plans that came in, you could actually have multiple people looking at the same plan at the same time and maybe cut down some of the time it takes to process them.
Yeah, and that is something that's in the process of being implemented, and that's ultimately communicated at the pre-application conference, that initial meeting for a commercial project or a multifamily project. And the idea being is that with the technical nature of the engineering and public works drawings, the as-built drawings at the conclusion of a project, that it takes more time to do a review like that to ensure consistency with the city codes. So rather than 2 sets of plans, asking for an additional set of plans, a third set which could be routed among the different divisions of the engineering and public works departments.
So Kim, when you had your development put together, you had a pre-application conference?
We did.
Did you
And
find
that's
that helpful?
That's a very helpful process because it's just that. It's a pre-application process. So what you have in that environment is most of the departments are there when you sit down with your people or yourself and you're chatting with them. You get some of the basics out of the way. Fire department certainly can sit there and tell you exactly what you have to have. On the more complex projects, like the one we just got done constructing here, it gets a little confusing. You can't get it all in that meeting. But we brought, just recently, last month, we brought a developer who develops retail stores and they're negotiating. They're working with us to put in a couple of stores on our project, and it was extremely helpful for them. They were from out of state. They knew about Prescott because they're doing projects in Phoenix. But to bring them up, because I kept telling them, these guys are great. They'll work with you. They just need to know what you need. And when we left that meeting, and we had, I think, 6 or 7 departments at that meeting that day. Some were not there. It's summertime, so there was certainly vacations. But when they left, they were just pleased as punch. They said, I can't get over that. They wish that Surprise and Chandler were as friendly as Prescott. And that was very helpful for them to get some of the basics. They could then go back to their engineers and architects and plan out some certain things that they could do and couldn't do. That was extremely helpful. And then hopefully they'll be submitting their first draft of plans back through these departments.
So when is the permit actually issued? Is it issued at the pre-application?
No, pre-application is that very first conversation. Again, it's a no-cost requirement actually under the Land Development Code, but it's an investment of time of the city resources to help folks that are of an interest in developing what codes would come into play. And oftentimes that is the initial conversation of where architects might work more closely with building staff, or engineers might work more closely, design engineers might work more closely with the utility department, and ultimately in designing the project. So when at the time it's geared to have the first submittal towards a building permit to be the most complete it possibly can be, and it ultimately saves time for everybody and money throughout the process. So to answer your question, the permit is ultimately answered after each and every reviewing department signs it off, and it's primarily life safety issues are what the Prescott's building and fire codes and utility codes are all about. It's ensuring public safety and ensuring that the basic life safety aspects of a project are covered.
And I think you indicated we follow international building standards?
Yeah, the city has adopted well, it's not the most recent, but 2012 International Building and Fire Codes. And there are some local amendments to that because not all aspects of those international codes are pertinent to the kind of construction in Prescott. And for example, there might be a seismic requirement in Prescott which is very different than what you'd find in either LA or San Francisco. Where Prescott has an amendment has to do with snow load and wind loads. And when we're dealing with architects, engineers out of the Phoenix area, that's one of the things we make them aware of, is that these are the requirements with respect to wind speed and the amount of snow that they have to design to. So it's very different what they might be typically otherwise used to.
Yeah. So you deal with Public Works down on the Virginia Street.
That's correct, on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
So they're primarily looking at engineering issues and flood issues, I guess flood control issues, things of that nature.
That's correct.
What are some of the other things they look at?
Well, they look at utilities. Many people know that Prescott has a very extensive water and sewer system, and in some respects it's an aging system. And through the Public Works Capital Improvement Program, there are improvements made to those on a regular maintenance schedule. But when you get a larger scale project, say use Touchmark as an example, it involves mainline extensions of water and sewer. And those need to meet city codes and state codes, but it also involves the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality through their review and approval process. And in fact, ADEQ ultimately issues a notice of construct, and at that point, the Public Works Department can sign off after it's complied with all of the city regulations. Likewise, ADQ issues a notice to operate, approval to operate. And you can't occupy a structure until that water system has been accepted by the city of Prescott and signed off by the state of Arizona. So the Public Works is really the infrastructure side of things, and predominantly within the public right-of-way, but anytime there's public utilities extended onto a private property, the city ultimately takes a dedication, accepts dedication, and maintains those public systems. So anytime a water line, for example, is looped through a project, the city is very much involved in that review and ensuring that it meets all standards before it's ever given an opportunity to operate.
Also, I know when we have development of various housing areas, the developer, I think, is responsible for the roads and things of that nature. and eventually we accept those.
Through the construction, yeah. And there are times where a developer comes in and requests they to be private streets, in the case of a gated community. And they want it to be exclusive use of their residences, whereby the city does have access for public safety, emergency vehicles, that type of thing. And I think a good example of that is Prescott Lakes have a number of gated communities where if you're not a resident or a guest of a resident, then you don't have free access. But for the most part, streets are dedicated along with the other public infrastructure, and it's a city maintenance responsibility from that point.
And I've heard about some developments where maybe the streets were not wide enough, or maybe didn't have quite the right asphalt mixture or whatever, and so they didn't meet our codes. And then later on, some people moved out and new people came in, and they said, well, why isn't the city putting in sidewalks? Why isn't the city maintaining this? But they don't meet our codes.
That's correct, they
And
don't.
so what happens in that case?
Well, if they don't meet our codes, it's probably a function of the codes having been changed over the years. And a number of years ago, the minimum street standard, you used to have a narrow right-of-way. As long as you had a 20-foot paved section, for example, you could have roll curb. And the requirement is they had to be half-acre lots. And I'm thinking Forest Trails is a good example of that scenario, where there were much larger lots than the typical 9,000 square foot residential lot. But the developer intentionally wanted those to be private streets. And you're correct, there are times that different areas approach the city about taking over a dedication of a street that doesn't meet city standards. Or in some of the older neighborhoods, the codes just weren't in place at that time. There are a number of different methods by which streets and other public infrastructure can be brought up to city codes. Usually it's very expensive, and much of that with topography. But the city is really not in a position to be able to go in and upgrade streets. And certainly water and sewer is different, but a street that's too narrow of a section would oftentimes require additional right-of-way and that type of thing.
I think we've even had instances where people maybe started a development and had a sewer district because there was no way to connect to the city at that time. Later on, the city got out there, and then they want us to hook into their sewer system, but it doesn't meet the standards that we currently have. So I think in those cases, are we primarily looking at them upgrading to meet the city standards before we actually accept them?
Yeah, either through a cash or a monetary commitment to the city to bring the system up, or to actually do the work themselves, where the sanitary district might actually do that work.
Okay. I think one of the things I'd like to talk about too is I think over at your place, when you were building, you had some problems with water flow in that area. And because I know when I go over to your area, I know there's some grates in the streets.
There are.
I guess water was running across the road and we had to put in some kind of special storm control.
It was a real special one, and we worked a long time on that. And you're talking about the drainage system,
Right.
And our project had some uniqueness to it in that we're across from the lake, from Willow Lake. Most projects you have to retain your water for a certain time so that you're not sending your water off to your neighbor's property or onto the streets and overburdening the neighborhood. In our case, the city actually wanted us to get our water into the lake as quickly as possible. I'm not sure what their motivations were, but that's what they wanted. As a result of that, we had to put in a very extensive piping system underground. And it was a 15-acre parcel, so you had a lot of major pipes. You had two 5.5-foot pipes underground, and then throughout the whole place. And those grates are meant to collect all the water from going onto the street. I think you noticed the one off the driveway that goes out to, excuse me, Willow Lake Road. That grate is meant to not have the water go onto Willow Lake Road, and it goes underground into a huge vault on the property, and then flows underneath Willow Lake to the lake itself. And what that does is keep erosion from your neighbor's property. You can't hurt your neighbor because you didn't want to contain your water, and that was very long and very arcane process. complicated in our particular case because we lost 2 people, the drainage guy in the middle of it, and the new guy came on and wasn't really familiar, so it took some time to get that going. But drainage is a major part of any large development, or small. I had a conversation just the other day with another member of the Planning Commission who lives across the street from me, and he was telling us the story of building his home, single-family home, and the drainage became extensive for his lot because his lot had collected all the water and it was running off, so he had to learn how to do something to contain it in his parcel. So that became a big issue.
Just to interject something here. The city requirement, as you know, is the post-development flows of water off of a property cannot exceed the pre-development flows in volume or velocity. In the particular situation with the lake, your project it's a very large watershed, and to detain water on site and meter it out, rather than just get it into the watershed as quickly as possible, it in effect would be holding water back while all the water from higher up in the watershed came down. So it was determined that it would be better that it actually got into the watershed rather than do the detention.
And in that particular case, the city was just great in stepping up. Our city manager, Craig McConnell, saw the issue that Tom briefly explained very clearly. And he said, we can't burden this parcel with other parcels' water that was flowing onto it. And the city stepped forward and participated by putting another pipe in across Willow Lake Road after we built our infrastructure. So that's the kind of coordination that you're looking for from a city. Right. Things that they can do. Cities can always be interference, but it's a great city that can be helpful and figure out how we're all going to get to what we're looking for.
Right. And I still recall that project when it came in. It was fairly pricey, but it was something we had to do to keep things moving. And I think possibly we didn't really realize the actual flow of water in that area until actually the project was well underway. It's not something that was engineered in from the very start. And as time went on, we realized we had an issue, and we stepped up, and I think we took care of it.
They did a great job with it. And that particular drainage is a major drainage flow from Prescott Lakes. Right. So it was part of other developments.
Yeah, you got a large hill above you there that probably has a lot of watershed that comes down your way. Yeah. Well, we'll be back in a few more minutes. There's a lot more to talk about, and we're looking forward to telling you about a couple other things we got here. Welcome back to the Prescott Today show. If you're just joining us, my name is Harry Oberg. I'm the Mayor of Prescott. I have with me Mr. Tom Geis, who's our Director of Community Development for the city, and Kim Maverick, who is a developer that is a customer of the city. And we just finished up a segment a little bit short time ago talking about what we try and do to improve moving permits forward, trying to get people to start building when, if they got a timeline they want to work within. We're not holding them up. Obviously, customer service is important. I think it's our primary function for the community. And so I'd like you to just explain some of the things you've done recently to try and help make it easier for people coming in to get permits, that they understand the process better. We can move them faster. We talked a few minutes ago about having maybe an extra set of plans or two so you can have multiple people in your office or in Public Works looking at them, so that we're not holding them up at just moving one set of plans through.
Well, yes, Mayor, you're correct. We're in the business of customer service for people that are involved in private development for construction projects on private property. And some of the things that we've done most recently, in addition to creating the one-stop permit centers, we've done some changes in the immediate department to create an area for folks that if there is a wait, it's a little bit more comfortable for them to do so. But the mayor and council, because of the increase in construction activity, also approved additional position in the budget for the fiscal year 17, and we're in the process of attempting to fill that position. In fact, it's out. Job is being posted now I think it closes in another 3 days. So we've done a number of things to enhance the coordination among staff, the processing of plans, and I think at the top of the list of the things that is to be responsive to customers, the people coming in looking for information, and we attempt to be as responsive as possible.
What's the turnaround time on maybe a residential home?
For a custom home versus say a more of a tract home, but a custom home, the initial turnaround time is 3 weeks. That's our goal.
Okay, so from the time the person comes in and says, I got a set of plans, you start looking at it, and in 3 weeks they could have them approved and have a permit to start building.
Providing it's been designed to all of the city codes. And invariably, I mean, there's very few that go through the process and get a permit in 3 weeks. But that's really incumbent upon the architect and or the engineer in the design, is to ensure the compliance with the different codes. So the first round review is 3 weeks, and about somewhere between 6, 7, potentially 8 departments, depending on the location, because of topography and floodway, floodplain type information. Oftentimes other departments are involved in the review process. But the turnaround time, it fluctuates. Sometimes we'll get down to 2 weeks for a turnaround. Other times it goes to 4 weeks. And it's really contingent upon the number of permits, applications that we get in. So if a project doesn't receive its permit in the first review, it goes back to the architect and engineer for changes to the plans for compliance with code. And then the second review we try to do within 7 to 10 days. For the most part, single-family custom homes get approved on the second, if not the third review.
So what you're telling me is, we've got very definite timelines, but I have some people come and say, you know, it took me 6 weeks, 2 months to get this plan approved.
Yeah.
But a lot of that time, I think, is that they have to go back to their architect or their engineer and get corrections and determine exactly what they're going to do, get approval of the person that, you know, is going to have to pay for the project. And so that takes time, and that's not really counted against us, or it shouldn't be counted against us.
No, and I think that's a very good point. And also there are some HOAs that have architectural review boards that want to review and approve plans before ultimately the city issues the permit. We don't wait for the HOA approval, but it's something that oftentimes holds it up as to why it's not resubmitted maybe as quickly as the property owner or the home owner would like. But, you know, when development increases, architects and engineers get very busy. And so it's not a matter of just doing one at a time. They've got many coming in. So.
You know, when we, before we went to break, we were talking about the pre-application conference where people could come in and kind of get an idea of what's going to be required so that, you know, they could maybe have the right codes, things of that nature already built into the plan when they bring it to you for the first time. But I think recently, I don't know whether it's Public Works or the Building Department or both of you together, came up with, I think, something called General Engineering Standards. Can you explain what that is? And maybe Ken can tell us how, if he thinks that's going to be valuable for him as a developer.
I can, yeah. The General Engineering Standards, recently adopted by Council, was really the culmination of a process that Public Works and Engineering departments began 6, 7, 8 years ago. And Henry Hash, the Public Works Director, worked this through the process with his staff, working closely with architects, engineers throughout the community. It was a very open public process to arrive at basic minimum standards for engineering. And that's all been codified in one section of the city code. And I think one of the benefits to that is that now everybody has an understanding of what the minimum requirements are. And it's in one consolidated location within the city code.
And this covers the gamut of possible construction.
Yes, it will. It addresses access, drainage, water, sewer, those types of things.
I remember somebody saying that they came in and thought they could use one type of pipe, and then the engineer said, no, it's a different type of pipe, and then somebody else came along and said, well, I think that first type of pipe is probably okay. So now, you know, you should be able to go in and look at the standards, and the standards should be able to tell you exactly what types of pipes you can use. And as long as you're following the standard, you should be okay, and it should move your permit through fairly quickly.
That's it, exactly. It really kind of puts everybody on the same playing field, so to speak, that there's an understanding of what needs to be included in that very first submittal of a development project.
So have you seen any improvement since?
I haven't seen, because my project at this point is past that phase, but we did, through the Planning Commission, did get to discuss it at a couple of hearings. And I guess generally what the standards did was unify them. We used to have standards from Yavapai County and Maricopa County and other standards. The engineers may not have known exactly what we were looking for. So when our Public Works Department came up with these standards, and keep in mind, as I understand it, these standards are for the items that the city is going to assume liability for. The sewer, the water, things you're connecting to their program. Where if if a builder put in inferior product, the city could end up having to inherit that and replace water pipes or sewer pipes at a different time. And of all the things they did, there was only, as I recall, just a couple of issues that there was some controversy over. And I know there still is some controversy over that pipe issue that I'm technically not proficient to talk about it. But I think generally you like to know what the rules are going in. And if there's a case where, and in Prescott we have some serious issues because we have terrain issues. If we were flat and sandy, you could have one standard be simple for everybody. But here we have a lot of different issues. You have different types of soil that can impact pipes, plastic pipe or cement pipe differently. And I think that's where a lot of that controversy was over that. But having a good standard is really helpful so that you can move your project through. And if the standard is reasonable, nobody squawks about it.
Right. And I think you've also set up some meeting rooms. So if somebody comes in with a very complex project, you're not standing out there at the counter. And I think you're also trying to get somebody that's going to be hired to, I guess maybe just where something's permitted for a very small item or a very small project, you can move them through maybe in a day or two. Maybe right then, I don't know.
Well, that's the idea, is ultimately get to a point for very simple type permit applications that the turnaround is literally over the counter when possible. And then for smaller additions and those types of projects, it's a matter of days, not weeks. And so we believe this additional staff person, who we're going to be putting right at the front counter, seated right at the front counter, is going to help because they're going to be relieve some of the pressure on just the plans examining function, which is where most of the plans go currently. So we're hoping to get that in place probably hopefully in the next 30 to 60 days. So we have somebody new on board to help us out with that.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
that's a nice idea.
And you brought up working on P&Z, and maybe you can kind of talk to your experience. I think you said you were on a couple of committees. One was other than
I'd been on Board of Adjustment. Prior to that, yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about those and how you feel about your commitment to the board and the time it takes, and because one of the things I think I'd like the public out there to know about is we have boards, commissions, and committees, and every year we have a certain number of positions that either become vacant or it's time for them, they're staggered, so it's time for them to be renewed. And I've always felt that, rather than just figuring that person wants to stay there, I think I would like to give everybody a chance to have an opportunity to come in and support the city in any way they can. I've had a lot of volunteers come up and say, I'd like to be on a board or commission. So, I feel that, if we do come up with a vacancy or it's time to renew an application, that the person on the board currently needs to reapply too, rather than just giving them, allowing them to continue. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about boards and commissions.
There's so many boards and so many commissions, and I think your conversation about that is quite accurate. There are a lot of people that would love the chance to participate in their own city on a level that's it's periodic. Some of the commissions don't meet but once every couple of months. Even the Planning Commission, which is a state mandated board, we don't meet unless there's something to talk about. But I can tell you, in reference to the Planning Commission, one of the goals is just what we've been talking about here, is to help the public understand. We've kind of made we have a great group, and if I got a second, I'll mention these guys. We got Joe Gardner, who's an architect. He's an avid outdoors hiker. He's a building owner, so he's invested in the community. We've got George Sheets, who's everywhere. Every time I go someplace, George is there. He's very familiar with homeowners associations, the trails, the outdoors, and whatnot. You got Tom Menser, who's our chair, who's a builder, architect, been around the community as long as I have practically. Terry Marshall was the director of real estate for Fry's and Kroger's grocery stores for decades. He was responsible for placing the stores in the right places, and so he's very familiar with codes and whatnot, what cities require. Got Len Scamata, who has been all of those things, and a developer and a councilman for a short time. And then we now have a gentleman by the name of Phil Good, who's been a businessman in the non-real estate area. So I think we have a great board there, commission. But I can tell you, one of the missions that we have on the Planning Commission is to have people understand why some of the rules apply, why we have a general plan, why there's building codes, why there's setbacks, there's driveways, and why you can't do certain things. And a lot of it, when you're looking at your particular case, you don't understand the rule. But when you look at it from a mass, you realize, yeah, I don't want all the garages out by the curb. There should be setback further. In some cases, you can have that. And that's what we do. We look at cases. For someone to, and when public comes to us, they're expecting or requesting a change in what's going on. And many of the things are mandated that we have to. I'll give you one great example that we were very proud of, working with Touchmark some time ago. They had put their building, and their building's up on the top of that hill above Walmart. They had a big sign out in front, and their plan was almost to the edge of the hill. And we went through, I think, a couple of discussions on this, and not, which is not uncommon. We had a 4-3 vote approving that plan. But the 3 members of the commission that didn't like the plan expressed the viewpoint from the city, from the street, from seeing Highway 69, how it would impact it even though it was up high, some of the configuration design of the building. And I have to tell you, I was really amazed, the first time I've seen it, they had approval. And the next day, Touchmark and the landowner, Jim Lee, got a hold of one of the members of the commission and said, how can we make this look better? How can we have it be more a part of the community? And they changed it. They changed their height on the frontage there. They moved it back. They put some different design in. And I think that's the result of having open discussions at the planning department. The other purpose of planning commission is to have people. We've had conversations 2 or 3 times on certain issues just to help the public understand why some things have to happen and why we can't control other things, so that my joke is by the time it goes to council, they're not still as mad. They may still show up, but they at least understand there's a process, and people gave them the respect of hearing what they had to say. And we're real clear about anybody that wants to come up and talk at any time during the meetings, at special times in the meeting, that they allow to come up, as long as they don't keep repeating the same statement the previous guy did. And most of the people are very respectful for that. We've had a number of cases where people were very happy when they left.
Right. At least they understood better the situation.
It wasn't just arbitrary. We have people that come in and say, well, that's going to destroy my view. And we have to very politely say to them, it wasn't your view. and they want that. But they get it after a while that every property owner has a right, certain rights on their property. And it's not your property to look at, it's theirs to own. So that's probably one of the biggest ones we get faced with.
Yeah. I think that was related to recent annexation.
It was direct,
Where
the most recent we had
vacant
that.
land,
Oh, yeah.
as far as the eye could see, and somebody
Yeah.
came in and said, well, I'd like to see the antelope coming up to the fence, and this is my view shed, and I want
Yes.
to keep it. But it's somebody else's private property,
It is.
and he wants to go ahead and develop it. And they were worried about the fact that they want to lose their view shed. And but I think he had a good point too. He could very well come in and put a stockyard on his property.
He could put a feedlot right there if he wanted to.
So I mean, it is his property, and for us to deny him the use of his property is a taking, which is illegal.
And I think that's, Mayor, I think that's one of the biggest underlying feelings that people have. They really want to shut the door after they get here because they love Prescott. It's a wonderful place. We all want to be here. And they want to close the door after it. But there are property rights, and people do have the right to expect a city to allow them to do what they can't do on their property, and not to necessarily to protect somebody's view shed or even their noise in some cases.
And obviously, I think we need about 1% growth every year to be able to continue to have a vibrant market and to keep our economy moving and growing. and whether or not it's you know, a residence, you know, that's going to be property tax, or it's a retail store that's going to get us, you know, sales tax. All this helps us be able to pay our bills. And I think you just gave a pretty good comment a little bit ago about somebody trying to come in here and trying to find some place to build, and it's kind of restricted for Prescott.
There just aren't a lot of great locations for, if somebody wanted to come to town today and put up a 30,000, say, square foot retail store, there aren't a lot of locations for that. They may, in fact, end up going to Prescott Valley, and so Prescott, or they might go to the Indian Reservation, neither of which send money to Prescott for the most part. So we would end up having people in Prescott take their paychecks out to Prescott Valley or to the Indian Reservation and spend their money at those stores. So our city depends so much on retail dollars. I know the amount of money the city receives out of property tax is minimal in relationship to the general budget, but sales tax is where it's going to be, and that becomes a real. And that's the result of a lot of legislative issues over the decades with the state of Arizona, and because they control so much, as you well know. You're dealing with that with the PSPRS issue. So sales tax is the only thing that a city can really expect to have as its own and reinvest in itself. And we need more sales tax here too.
Do you work with the other commissions? I know we have a preservation commission or committee. I'm not sure which one it is.
Commission.
Commission.
Yes.
And you know, if somebody has an issue, they want to have an appeal. They want to appeal what, a building code or?
Yeah, there's a number of different appeal options depending on the nature of I guess the request. And in the event of in the situation of the Preservation Commission, and maybe to back up a little bit, we have over 800 properties on the National Register, Historic Preservation Register. Wow. And one of the primary responsibilities of the Preservation Commission is to assist and help property owners retain the historic, their historic properties, and at the time of construction or additions. We also have local preservation districts, and these are districts, there are 13 of them, and probably the one that's most well known is the Courthouse Plaza district, and that's the four faces of the plaza.
So that's 13 inside the city limits?
13 districts inside the city limits. One of those is just, or a couple of those are just single building only. But in the event, in the case of the Courthouse Plaza, well, back up, all of the districts require at least 50% of the property owners to approach the council to be in favor of creating a local district. And each of those local districts has their own design guidelines that the commission uses in reviewing a particular project, depending on where it might be. And so if in the situation where these different districts were created as a result of the property owners approaching the city council and asking that these be created, it's not something that the city just creates and overlays on a property. So the Preservation Commission then appeal to an item that the Preservation Commission, in the rare event that they were to turn something down, because oftentimes it's a give and take. It's a conversation between Preservation Commission and the architect or the property owner, and they identify different ways to achieve what it is they're trying to do within the intent of the guidelines, again, which are ultimately approved by all of the property owners within that given district. That appeal, if there's an appeal to that decision, would go directly to council. In the event of an administrative decision that, say, I were to make, it would go to the Board of Adjustment. And the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial in that any appeals to the Board of Adjustment wouldn't go to City Council, it goes into Superior Court. And so they don't meet very often, but when they do, it's significant. It's a significant meeting and conversation if it relates to an appeal.
Yeah, whatever is determined there is final.
For the most
That's
part, and then it goes into the judicial system.
Okay, so the Board of Appeals can make a decision.
Well, yeah.
And if somebody wants to appeal that, then it goes in the Superior Court.
Right, that's
Okay.
the Board of Adjustment, yeah. And then the
Board
one
of
that's even somewhat at times confused with that is the Advisory Board's appeal, and that is a council-appointed board that, as you know, that's involved in looking at the International Building Code. So anytime we modify or amend the international codes or adopt the new codes, and we'll be back to council in probably 2018 for the 2018 codes, That group gets together and looks at the various codes and the proposed amendments to that code for local adoption. They're also an appeal body to a contractor if they have an alternate means and method to do some certain type of construction. Say there's a new technology that isn't been addressed in the code and they want to use it, and for some reason they're told no at the staff level. Well, they ultimately have that board, which is appointed again by the council to be able to go to seek some relief. And ultimately with the Planning and Zoning Commission, for the most part, everything the commission does is recommending and advisory to the city council.
Okay, let's talk about codes for a second. Let's say somebody has a plan that's gone through, has been permitted, and they're out, and it might take them 2 months, 6 months. I know when I had my house built, they started in January and they weren't done until November. So during that time, if new codes come into play, would your inspectors go out and apply the new code, or would they go with the code that was approved at the time that the person got the permit?
It would go with the codes that were in place at the time of permit.
Okay, unless there's something.
And if it were significant, it'd be more advisory. I mean, if it were life safety involving something, that there'd be a conversation with a contractor.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's the contractor that's advising and making the city aware of a situation because of a site-specific condition.
And that reminds me of one developer came to me and he was somewhat concerned, mad, if you really want to know. And what he was concerned about was the fact that I guess the fire department came out and said, okay, you need to clear this amount of vegetation away from the house. But of course the house is not up, you can't see it. So he went ahead and had that work done. And then of course when the house is finally finished, which is 2 or 3, 4 months later, they come back and they said, oh, you need to cut out all this other stuff. Well, of course the house is in place then. He
Yeah.
can't really get equipment back there.
Right.
So I think right now, we're starting to work with that. Can you tell?
Yeah, in fact, there's been a change, and we did this. It kind of coincided with the adjustment of the various fees for the different applications, and that fire department has moved up. Well, it's the wildland urban interface inspection is done to coincide with the footing inspection, but they're willing to meet out on site with anyone before they even start to do footings or even start to do the development, to be able to just have a conversation and talk about ultimately what the intent and the purpose of the code is. But I think that one particular example you explained, they just couldn't get heavy equipment back behind the building to do the additional landscaping removal. So, and I think that's another example where we want to try to facilitate and work with people as best we can, because if there's an aspect of the process that doesn't work for the people that we're providing the service, then we need to look at making changes
Yeah.
to make it work for them as well.
I think the last thing I'd like to talk about is the community development block grants, and that's a grant we get from the federal government. Can you kind of explain that and how we utilize it? I think there's even a committee that takes applications from the public and then determines where we're going to actually spend that money.
There is. That committee is a citizen advisory committee appointed by the mayor council, and they work with nonprofit groups that have qualifying activities. And the funds are federal funds. They come from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and they must benefit low to moderate income individuals. And that's by definition 80% or less of median income. And there's a wide variety of different types of projects that qualify for that. And there's what we call bricks and mortar projects, actual construction projects, or there's operational enhancement. And I think Meals on Wheels is a great example that's benefited from CDBG funds. So that process actually begins in the fall of every year. And the application, there's a workshop, and then there's an application requirement. You have to submit by February of the following year. And the committee works and holds a couple of different public hearings to take input and additional applications. And they do basically a prioritization of projects, and they prioritize projects to a 5-year plan that's called the consolidated plan. And this is a requirement of HUD that the city of Prescott must do every 5 years. And it identifies the priorities for these annual allocation plans and where the money will be spent. Ultimately, it ends up to the city council with 2 public hearings, and the council adopts, in the case of the consolidated plan, every 5 years, and then the annual allocation plan every year. And those projects then go into the bidding process and construction process. And we're fortunate enough to be able to contract with Northern Arizona Council of Governments to do administrative function of these CDBG activities. We have Isabel Rollins with MACOG, and she's very experienced in this and does a great job for us.
But I think we've also used the funding, and I think there was one where we, in a disadvantaged area in town, we actually put in some sidewalks or did some street repairs.
And we have that. We have that actually as listed as a construction project this year, and it's sidewalks. And so there have been instances where sidewalks, water lines, sewer. Well, I don't think we did sewer lines, but water lines in the Dexter neighborhood. And the Dexter neighborhood is one area in town as a census block group where it meets that low to moderate income.
Yeah.
And then there are other areas where they call them exception areas.
Yeah.
But,
And I think we asked for $400,000 or $500,000 a year, and I think we get about half of that, don't we?
yeah, somewhere in the
Pretty
neighborhood of
consistent.
about 240,000.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit at least less each and every year.
Well, thank you, Tom and Ken.
Thank you, Harry.
I hope this has been helpful for our viewing public to have a little better understanding of exactly what we do in trying to help people move forward in building their homes or their businesses or whatever. And also the fact that, I'm always very grateful of the people that step up from the community and come in and are willing to sit on boards and commissions and committees and taking time out of your valuable day to help us try and make sure the city's serving our public to the best ability.
Well, thank you. It's a great place to be, and it's a great place to contribute to. So it's a joy.
So thank you all for coming, and we'll have another great subject next month.